Well, it's great to be with two of the key leaders of the Budapest-based Center for Fundamental Rights, who have been delivering extremely interesting lectures to our summer school here in Split. And I've got the opportunity, and I intend to use it in order to ask them to tell us something of the success stories, and it is a success story, of conservatism in Hungary. Now, Peter, you basically run, or you're one of the key figures in this center, and you're also very well immersed into conservatism and the conservative project in Hungary. Could you tell us a little about the center and your work?
Yes, of course. Thank you for the question and, of course, for the invitation. So the Center for Fundamental Rights was established in 2013, and the idea was to establish such kind of civil society organization that was the time when the Hungarian parliament and the conservative supermajority of the Hungarian parliament was adopting major legal structures of the country, accepting the new fundamental law, which was not provisional anymore as the former one, but a solid constitution of a free and democratic country. But from the beginning of the Fidesz and Christian Democratic government started to work at 2010, the leftist liberal mainstream media and political elite started to criticize the country and criticize the whole legislation process from a legal and human rights perspective. And me and my two friends, who are currently leaders of the Center for Fundamental Rights, were working on different parts of the politics that time as young lawyers, and we decided that to mitigate this falsified criticism, it is very much needed to organize ourselves in an official way and establish an NGO, a civil society organization, which from a professional perspective are responding to these criticisms. And actually, I might be biased because I'm one of the founder of the Center for Fundamental Rights, but it became really successful because that was the first conservative think tank with a legal focus, especially describing the legislation and the legal situation of the country and of the European debates for the public. And we've been quite active in the past 9 years.
Quite large, in fact, aren't you?
Yes, we started with 4 employees, and we are now more than 60 colleagues are working with us. And of course, it became more like an old-fashioned think tank, so we are not only focusing on legislation, on legal issues, but we have different departments. For example, Zoltán is sitting here with me, is responsible for the geopolitical issues. Within our center, we have a political grouping. I mean, political analysts are working with us, geopolitical analysts, economic analysts, and of course, we are very active in the media presence. We are making our own content, especially for social media, and we have very strong cooperations with radio stations, television stations, and of course right now we are in the process to broadening our international relations.
That's
why we're here.
It's incredibly impressive, and of course much more successful, and dare I say much better funded than any of our efforts here in Croatia, so we've much to learn from you. Zoltán, I don't really want to ask you about your particular speciality, which is geopolitics. I want to ask you really about the fight back by Hungarian conservatives against the lies and exaggerations and campaigns of mendacity to which you've been subjected, and how you've put the arguments about that. And also, I'd like to get your thoughts about the press campaigns that have been launched against you, and how to fight back over all this. And I'm sure that our Croatian and indeed non-Croatian viewers can learn something from your experience.
So I think what we must state very clearly that fact-based journalism journalism completely disappeared on the left. Whereas The Guardian, one of the flagship lefty newspapers in Great Britain, was still a respectable publication 10, 15 years ago. Sometime around Brexit, but by the time Donald Trump was elected president, certainly they have completely abandoned all pretense to being journalists. And they have turned the once famous newspaper into a yellow publication or a neo-Marxist pamphlet, basically. True. And this has happened across the board. I don't want to castigate just The Guardian, because this exact process has happened to the New York Times, for example, the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times. So this is a phenomenon that is universal to the leftist journalistic field as a whole. And people should see that. I'm hoping that increasingly people do see that, and that is what we should base our fight back on, that we call out them as what they are, liars and propagandists. These are no longer just exaggerations. This is mendacity. These are outright lies that they throw at Hungary. Let's just speak about two instances here. We are often accused of violating human rights, and we are often accused of anti-Semitism. Both of them are completely and utterly baseless. And it is relatively simple to see how they are baseless. Because whenever any of your audience reads a negative article about Hungarian state of human rights, just pay attention to the specifics. Are there any specifics in this article? There won't be any. They cannot list any examples of Hungary violating the human rights of anybody. It just simply isn't there. When it comes to charges of anti-Semitism, there is a problem of anti-Semitism as a whole in Western society, and in that sense, Hungary is not an exception. But for instance, in Hungary, the anti-Semitic party was actually part of the opposition progressive coalition. And please take note that anti-Semitism as a European phenomenon is much more prominent on the left these days than it is on the right. And if you look at violent hate crimes against Jewish people, there are 0 examples of that in Hungary, and there are many in Germany and in France. Having said that, the last thing I would like to point out with regards to this is that the international and the Hungarian Jewish organizations are quite happy to respond to inquiries about the state of anti-Semitism in various countries of Europe. Please just write a short email and ask them about Hungary. They will respond, and you need only to believe what they will say. The Jewish organizations are very clear on this matter. Hungary is among the safest places in the Western world, in the world in general, for Jewish people.
Well, that's absolutely fascinating and, as far as I'm concerned, quite persuasive. And I would just like to end, because obviously my background is neither Hungarian nor am I a born Croat, but obviously I came to live here permanently 6 years ago. And so I view with a skeptical Anglo-Saxon eye much of what happens. But that's not a bad background, incidentally, to view of foreign culture. And one thing that I notice is that too often in Croatia, as a result of history and ideology and experience, there's a lack of grasp among Croats of how much they are part of Central Europe, of which Hungary, sometimes under difficult circumstances as regards Croats and sometimes less difficult, but of which Hungary is a very, very important, perhaps the most important element. And to grasp again the enormous importance of learning from the experience of and being part of the values of Central Europe seems to me to be, and I know that Stjepa agrees with me, seems to me to be one of the messages that the Centre for the Renewal of Culture wants to get across to Croats too. So thank you both very much for giving us all the benefit of your wisdom.